will remain in the European Union. They don't want a divorce, so their motivation is to contest that divorce by putting forward unreasonable and unacceptable terms which offer us only a punishment deal. And that was something which our Right Honourable friend, the former Prime Minister, anticipated in her Lancaster House speech. She said she feared that that might be the approach of the European Union. They would be intent on offering us a punishment deal. That's exactly what they have done. And the only alternative under Article 50 to a punishment deal is no deal. And unless amended, this bill will remove even that option. Which enables us to put pressure on the European Union to come to the negotiating table and talk about a better deal than the one that we've got at the moment. As our Right Honourable friend, the Leader of the House, said yesterday, this is a dreadful deal. Which is one which has already been rejected by the House on several occasions. But are we really going to be left by this bill with the options of either no Brexit or Brexit in name only? And that's essentially what we're talking about tonight. The United Kingdom's freedom to divorce under Article 50 is constrained by this bill. It's made subject to an EU veto, enabling the EU to block Brexit effectively, indefinitely, unless or until the EU reneges on the decision of the referendum. It removes any incentive for the EU to negotiate, and that's why the Prime Minister is right. If this bill passes tonight, then we've taken away from the Prime Minister any opportunity to negotiate. All he could do is to supplicate, be a suppliant at the table of the European Union Court. And effectively, this will be an example of modern international slavery, where we are imprisoned by the European Union with no reasonable way out. And sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, the EU's collaborators in this House have become more strident and less cautious as time has elapsed. My rather honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, has said both in public and in his House and in private that his objection to no deal is only because of the lack of preparation. But he has now dropped that pretence, telling us yesterday that this bill will show whether or not the House of Commons accepts a policy of a no-deal exit. So effectively he's saying if this bill carries on into law, then we will be telling the European Union not to worry, under no circumstances will we be leaving without a deal. In other words, we will be throwing in the towel to the European Union. Nothing in this bill is related to or related to the no-deal preparations, or recognises that since the change of government, expenditure on no deal has increased dramatically, and that we are now in a position where we will be prepared for no deal, which we should have been better prepared for in the first place. If the Ramonas had the guts, they would have brought forward a bill to revoke Article 50. That's essentially what they want in their hearts, and that's what the European Union wants as well. But they know that, if presented to this House, will be resoundingly defeated. What we have instead is the revocation of Article 50 in all but name, a device to deceive the public. And this is a squalid little bill. It's an affront to Parliament and to democracy and to the people, because it enslaves the United Kingdom to the European Union. It relegates us to the status of a colony. It treats the United Kingdom as if we have been vanquished in war by giving the EU the power to dictate the terms of our surrender. I despair at the defeatism of so many of my colleagues, and I hope that we will fight back and win in a general election for which I cannot wait.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Deputy Speaker. Is that point of order?
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Lefroy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it in order for my right honourable friend, for whom I have great respect, to compare what we're talking about now with slavery, which around the world is a most terrible thing? And
order. I appreciate the point that the honourable gentleman is making, and indeed his dedication to fighting that particular evil, but that is a debating point, not a point of order, and we don't have time this afternoon. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I rise. I'm going to be quite brief because I know many others want to get in, and I just was going to compare a couple of these amendments and then a few words as to why I think this bill is a very bad bill. I mean, first of all, I do say to the member for Aberavon, who's not sadly in his seat, that I think this is a genuine attempt to try and find a way forward. It's intriguing. I've just been reading it now, having just looked at it, and he's very specific in his, particularly in one of his amendments, in which he says that the purpose of the letter to extend would be, and I quote, to include provisions reflecting the outcome of inter-party talks and announcement by the Prime Minister on 21st May 2019. And of course, I think the problem, first of all, as I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I say that this is a genuine attempt by those who really do think that this House stands in serious danger of being perceived by the public more and more as having taken the position that nothing will satisfy it, and that basically the only thing that they want at the end of it all is to defy the decision taken at the time of the referendum. And that is very much the opinion now growing out there, and I was intrigued to listen to the member for Aberavon when he made that point, that we are now being perceived in this place as a parliament opposed to the people, not a parliament to represent the people. The people voted to leave, whether we liked it or not, and now this parliament seems set on a course to obfuscate and delay that with a view eventually to overturning it. And there's no question in my mind, and I would say this concerning his observations during his comments, as I say, legitimate observations. We get on very well, we play football together, so I'm slightly in favour of him anyway. But the point I would make is that he said they were good talks. The problem was his front bench at no stage, I think, conducted those in a genuine sense. I think the truth was they probably never intended to agree anything with my honourable friends who were in government at the time. And I think one of the reasons for that, and actually interesting in a whispered exchange with the father of the House, it was him who made this point, probably he said because they were under attack by the second referendum crowd, who were absolutely opposed to any idea that they could strike any kind of agreement with the government that would do away with the idea of a second referendum and therefore a vote to vote down the original referendum, and I think that lies at the heart of it. There is a deceit in all of this. I don't, as I said earlier on, I genuinely believe that the member for Aberavon, the Honourable Member for Aberavon, was genuine in his view, and many of those who were aligned alongside him in that regard, but I do not believe that to have been the case with the front bench of the Labour Party. I think, in fact, throughout all of this, they have played fast and loose. And when I come to the proposition concerning this bill, I come back to the point why I think this is a bad bill, because for all the talk about not wanting to have no deal, but wanting to have a deal, every one of those who proposed, some of them here I suspect, I know, voted for the Prime Minister's deal, but if they really, really wanted any deal rather than no deal, they would have voted for that. But so strangely, they found themselves voting against it at the time. I give way to my honourable friend.
I mean, he's making an absolutely valid point, which is there is a huge amount of virtue signalling in this House, Madam Deputy Speaker, about people who do not want no deal, but will not vote for a deal. And therefore, the amendment that I have proposed enables everyone to state very clearly on the record for their constituents whether they will allow us all that chance to vote for a deal rather than for no deal on Monday the 21st of October. Does he agree that that is a very sensible way of putting the issue absolutely straightforwardly?
Well, I wasn't going to come to his amendment because there was a fair amount of debate, but I kind of linked him and the member for Aberavon in the same sense, and I think both are trying generally to find a way through, and we're old friends, and I have to say to my honourable friend that I generally think that he has made an effort to propose that, and they're similar in one regard, except that his proposal goes back to the final discussions that were taking place. My problem is that, in truth, I just don't think that many members on the other side, enough members on the other side, really, really believe that they want to ensure that we leave. I think the truth is that what has grown in the front bench of the Labour Party particularly, and in some of the other parties, is that there will be a way, if you delay long enough on this, at some point the cry for a second referendum gets stronger and stronger, and then they will go to that, and their view now, as we hear from the front... In a minute. In the front bench of the Labour Party, I think, is that now they support the second referendum, having said they didn't originally, and they now also support voting Remain in that referendum, which they said they didn't before, because they said in the 2017 election they would implement the decision of the original referendum. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
The right honourable member for giving way, and I'd just like to inform him that I think there are many of us on this side of the House who wish to vote for a deal, and in fact I will vote for a deal when it comes back in front of this House. The issue now is making sure that we have the opportunity to vote for a deal so that we can ensure we don't crash out of the European Union, damaging my constituents' economies.
I encompass the Honourable Lady in my remarks about there are those who are lined up alongside the member for Aberavon with genuine intent and wanted to do something about it. But what I am simply saying now, and I want to conclude on this, is that I think all of these are very interesting, but the problem I think we face is that the front bench of the Labour Party's position has completely shifted now, and it is clear to me that they do not want an agreement of almost any sort. Any obstacle will be placed in its way, it will never achieve that, and enough delay will produce, they think, the second referendum, and then of course they want to vote Remain. So I think this is a vehicle now to produce a route, they think, to the second referendum, and that's why this is all about. All I can say is I did not want my colleagues taken out and lost the whip in this party. I've been a bit of a rebel in the past myself, but I do say everybody knows what they do when the government says that there is a vote of confidence. And the reason why the government said a vote of confidence on this is because this is at the very heart and soul of where the government at the moment is, which is it wants to negotiate a deal, it wants to get a deal, but it does not think that you'll ever get a deal if you're not able at that stage to be able to say, ultimately, we will leave, whatever the case. Therefore, it's over to you to show some flexibility in those arrangements. And I simply say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will continue to vote against this agreement, notwithstanding the fact that I think some of my colleagues will not, but I have to say this is a route to delay, and that delay in turn to a second referendum, and that second referendum, in their hope, is a way of overturning the view and belief of the British people, which would be quite undemocratic.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have some sympathy with the Amendment 19 moved by my honourable friend for Gloucester, and some sympathy for New Clause 1 and also Amendment 6. But the reason I can't vote for particularly New Clause 1 and Amendment 19 is because I think people outside of here have figured out what's really going on here. And as I said in the intervention, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are in the position we are in of having not left the European Union because there are people in here who got elected on a mandate and who stood up and said they intended to deliver the result, who never had any intention of delivering our exit from the European Union. They're scared of their electorates, yes, they're now scared of their selectorates, but they had no intention. So what they have done, Madam Deputy Speaker, is they have played for time. In exactly the way my right honourable friend suggested a moment ago. And they want to play for time again, because they want to get us to 2020. And when we get to 2020, it then suddenly becomes, well, that referendum was in 2016. It's quite hard to continue to implement a mandate from 2016, roughly the length of an average parliament, in 2020. That's what's going on in here, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the people have figured it out. My constituents have figured it out, who went to the polls in 2016 and voted to leave the European Union by a margin of 67% on the belief that their result was going to be implemented, because both sides told them that. They trotted along in the general election of 2017, and 93% of them went out and voted for two political parties who said they were going to implement the result. And they figured it out, as I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are people in here who never have any intention of delivering on this result, because what will happen is if we have another extension and something else comes back, there will be another reason why they can't quite bring themselves to vote for it, because their particular niche thing that they have selected, perhaps having never mentioned it before, will suddenly now be the block on why they can't quite get themselves across the line. I'm sick of it, Madam Deputy Speaker. The people are sick of it. and they have figured it out. And the reason we're in the position we're in now, that when people talk about compromise, is because we've had this perverse alliance. We've had this perverse alliance of people who never wanted us to leave the European Union, Remainers, voting with the minority of people on my side who actively want us to have a no-deal Brexit. They've trotted through the lobbies together, whilst people like me, who came into this House in 2010, absolutely determined to get us out of the European Union, have done exactly what was asked of us and is being demanded of us now, have compromised, have looked at that withdrawal agreement and said, you know what, it's not perfect, but I respect the promise I made to my constituents. I respect the minority of my constituents who also voted Remain and therefore expect me to represent them as well. And that's why I have compromised and voted for that deal on 3 occasions. I voted for a Norway option and an EFTA option on 4 other occasions. And the same people who lecture us repeatedly about how we need to compromise to get us across the line are the very same people, not all of them, but many of them, who trotted through the lobbies to kill that deal on 3 occasions and to kill the indicative votes on those 4 occasions. And Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to ask the question as well, when did it become the case that people who campaigned for Remain get to tell people who voted Leave what it is they voted for? Yeah. When did it become acceptable for them to say, no, these Leave voters, who I don't fully understand because I was on the wrong side of the debate and on the wrong side of my constituents, they didn't vote for no deal. I received an email from a constituent of mine last night called Kirsty, and she posed this question to me. And she said, why do these people who got the referendum result wrong, were on the wrong side, get to say why I voted? She said, I know why I voted Leave, and I'm prepared to have a no deal. And she signed off saying, my name's, she said, Kirsty, under 40, not a racist, and quite well educated. Because that's what we've been told, isn't it, throughout, that if you feel like you want a no deal, then obviously you're just a stupid, thick, racist northerner. And people have seen this. They're sick of it. We are sick of it. So I will not support any amendment that allows a further extension for this, because I know what's going on here. Yeah. I know, and my constituents know what's going on. Play it long, play for time, say you respect the result. You have no intention of respecting the result. They haven't respected the result in March of this year. They didn't in April. They're not going to on October the 31st, and you can sure as damn tell it, Madam Speaker, they ain't going to on January the 31st either.
Yeah. Sir John Redwood.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like us to leave on the 31st of October as agreed, with a free trade agreement or with serious talks for a free trade agreement, so that we need not impose new tariffs or barriers on our trade and their trade with us. I'm quite sure that I only have any chance of achieving that if the so-called no deal is left firmly on the table, and if the European Union knows that we will leave with no withdrawal agreement or no free trade agreement if they do not agree to those talks or offer one. It is our only lever. And I came to this debate against the bill because I think it tries to take away our only or best negotiating lever in the whole situation. And I've looked very carefully at these amendments and listened to the debate on the amendments before us, Amendment 6 and New Clause 1 and Amendment 19. And I'm quite sure that the members for Aberavon and Gloucester have very good intentions, and they are desperately trying to find compromise and a way forward at a time when the country is divided on this, as it was during the referendum campaign, and when this House remains extremely divided or fragmented into a series of different factions with different views on what is the best outcome. But having listened to those debates, I share the view of my honourable friend and my honourable friend for Christchurch, that these amendments are on the side of thwarting the referendum result. Yep. They are designed to undermine Britain's main negotiating card, which is our right to leave without having to make any more payments and accept any more laws or accept any instructions on our borders. The 3 things that the Leave voters I met in large numbers during the referendum campaign wanted: taking control of our money and our borders and our laws. We have the right to do that on the 31st of October. And it is because we have that right. Yes, take control of our laws. It is because we have that right, and that is what we're arguing about today. And I'm explaining the extreme irony that this Parliament that claims to believe in democracy is deliberately trying to thwart our democracy by denying the results of a democratic decision made by the people, which we said was theirs to make, and trying to overturn the promises that many candidates in the general election of 2017 made, on the Labour side in particular, and they now seem to have forgotten. Now they are members of Parliament. I give way.
I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend, and I noticed the laughter from the Scots Nats at what my right honourable friend was saying, and in view of the very good sense that he was speaking, I'd just like to, as it were, invite the House to consider this. Is it not the case that under the withdrawal agreement and the transition period, the decisions are taken by the Council of Ministers to impose obligations and laws on the United Kingdom as a whole, without our even being there, without any transcript, without any Hansard, and more or less almost invariably by consensus, and that the whole thing effectively is a massive racket, the object of which is to put us in a state of subjugation, and that if we accept...
Order. Sir William, thank you, but we're running out of time. Sir John.
Extremely important point, which goes to the heart of this crucial issue raised by the SNP from a sedentary position about our democracy. That one of the features many of us found most objectionable about the withdrawal agreement was just that for a long an unspecified transition period could have stretched on for many months. It was not clear what would end it. We would be under any new law that the European Union wished to impose upon us, with no vote or voice or ability to influence that law. And at the moment, as full members, we do have some influence, and we have a vote, and sometimes we manage to water something down or delay something. But we would have none of those rights. And of course, any of the existing massive panoply of European law could be amended or changed by decisions of the European Court of Justice, and that would all be completely binding on the United Kingdom. This is completely unacceptable for a democratic country, when a majority of people in a democratic referendum had voted to take back control of their laws, that their parliament then says, no, far too difficult a job for us, we don't want to participate in this process, we don't want to take control of your laws, we want to delegate most of them in many fields to the European Union and have a foreign court developing our law for us in ways that we might find completely objectionable. And none of the amendments that I've just been mentioning from Gloucester and Aberavon and others intending to find a compromise tackles this fundamental obstacle to the withdrawal agreement and to the idea that we can somehow negotiate our way out of the European Union if they don't think we just intend to leave. I give way.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair. Chair, in fact. Thank you. Mrs. Lamb. I'm very grateful indeed to the Right Honourable Gentleman for taking an intervention. May I just take him back to something they said, because it's really very important. The Right Honourable Gentleman and many of his colleagues have claimed in the referendum and subsequently and tonight that they're going to take back control of the borders. May I just ask the Right Honourable Gentleman how he intends to take back control of South Armagh, and would he like to come to Crossmaglen and explain why it's all right to go out without a deal?
Order. Before Sir John recommences his speech, we are running out of time. It would not be a proper debate if we don't hear from the front benches, and I'm sure that Sir John will understand that and come to a conclusion very quickly. Thank you.
Well, of course, if we just leave, we take back control of our borders, and we then decide whether we wish to do anything about it. We may wish to leave in place exactly all the existing arrangements. I'm not making any recommendations that would embarrass the Honourable Lady or her friends in Northern Ireland. We're very sensitive about that border. Indeed, the British government has made very clear that it sees no reason to impose new barriers and difficulties on our side of the Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland border at all. And that, I'm sure, would be very welcome to all those seriously worried about this issue in this House. And it makes one wonder why the backstop was ever invented or necessary, and why it is so difficult for the European Union just to strip it out, because they have a sincere promise, I think agreed by all parts of this House, that we don't wish to impose new barriers on that border in a way that could be an obstacle to good relations and the peace process. Briefly.
I wonder if my right honourable friend has ever, having builders in, and you haven't given them an end date. What happens, the building work goes on and on and on. Isn't it time that we told the builders 31st of October is the end date, you finish the job, no ifs, no buts, no compromise.
Order, let us not repeat. We all know it, it's right, it's great for emphasis to repeat things, but we are running out of time. Sir John Redwood.
I will accept your guidance and say that in conclusion, these amendments do not fix this bill. This bill is extremely damaging to our democracy, undermines our negotiating position, and would therefore achieve the opposite of what many of its proposers say they're trying to achieve.
Stephen Gethins.
Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the things that this bill has done today is showing the progress that can be made when members of Parliament work together, when we overcome our political divides. One thing that's also clear is that nobody seems to be arguing that leaving the European Union is a good idea. And I'm not sure how I follow the last contributions, but talking about issues like democracy, when you've got a government that wants to ignore laws that get passed by this place, that already ignores motions on crucial issues like pensions fairness for the WASPy women, and wants to stuff the unelected House of Lords full of pro-Brexit peers, is somehow democratic and bringing back control defies belief. But worst of all, on a no-deal Brexit, where there's no mandate, no one voted for it, and the Prime Minister told us it would be the easiest deal in the world and no chance that would ever happen. Now, whereas many members on the benches opposite, and I want to pay particular tribute to the member for North East Bedfordshire, made a fine contribution earlier on today, was a fine minister, but for whom there is no space left in the Conservative Party. But the member for Stone, in his contribution, told us everything we needed to know. When he talked of a mandate, he talked in terms of a Conservative Party leadership election, of which 0.1% of the population, if that, could vote. That is not a mandate. That is not a democracy. And let me say it to them, and I try to say it in gentle terms, but I'll say it in the strongest terms possible. Leaving the European Union and the harm caused to everybody by the government's no-deal Brexit is bigger than the Conservative Party, is bigger than every single party in this place. And when members think about this tonight, they do well to remember that. And I'll finally say something else. I think members like the member for Gloucester, amongst others, have had good intentions in what they try to do. But this is a government that's no idea what it's doing, and we must take no deal off the table. I'd like to thank the members who have backed our bill tonight, thank them for their contributions, and we won't be backing any amendments because we need to get this bill through. Take no deal off the table. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank everybody who's been contributing to this debate because it's been largely thoughtful and reasoned, both at committee stage and at second reading, and it's been the sort of debate that we could usefully have had more often over the last couple of years. And I do recognise that the amendments, particularly from the Honourable Member for Gloucester and my Honourable friend, the Member for Aberavon, are put forward with good intention and to seek to assist the process. But our view on all of the amendments is determined by the objective of the bill itself, and that was made clear by my right honourable friend, the Member for Leeds Central, and in the second reading debate. The bill has one clear purpose, and that's to prevent a disastrous no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. It's been an extraordinary coalition that's been brought together over the last few weeks to put the bill forward in a spirit of consensus. We know that no deal would be a disaster for jobs, for the NHS, for policing and security. And the government's own papers from Operation Yellowhammer made that clear. In addition, there's real anxiety about the lives of EU citizens in the UK and those who are too often forgotten, UK citizens in the EU, thrown into uncertainty and potential legal jeopardy. And of course, as many have pointed out, no deal would not be the end of Brexit. Quite the opposite. It would be the beginning of years of long negotiation over our future relationship, in which we would start from a significantly disadvantaged position. And when we make the arguments against no deal, we are not only speaking on behalf of that coalition in this House, but for many beyond. The CBI has called no deal a tripwire into economic chaos. The TUC has said it would be a disaster for working people, and this is our last chance to avoid no deal. The House has voted against it 3 times, but we need this legislation because the Prime Minister and his government can't be entrusted to enact the will of the House without it. The only reason that Parliament is even sitting today is because of the Right Honourable Member for Beaconsfield's amendments to the Northern Ireland Act, and the Prime Minister made it clear that he saw this September sitting period as a nuisance. I think he described the September sessions as a bit of a rigmarole. The Prime Minister has told the House he's pursuing a deal with the EU, but he's equally told the House nothing has been proposed to them, and the EU have, in effect, and there was, I think, a devastating critique from the former Chancellor earlier today. European officials have told the press that there is, quote, literally nothing on the table, not even a sketch of what the solution could look like, and the Prime Minister's closest advisor has called the talks apparently a sham. Got that right, at least. So the government's current working alternative to the backstop is simply taking the backstop out. There is nothing new being proposed. But if by some miracle there is some deal negotiated with the EU, then the Prime Minister can bring that back to the House for us to vote on. That's incorporated in the legislation. So let me turn to the amendments to the bill. I will.
I'm incredibly grateful to my old friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that there's no mandate in this place for no deal, just like there is no mandate for Remain? So in that spirit, will he and the front bench support our compromise amendment that looks to bring people across this House forward to get a compromise deal and get the House and the country out of this crisis?
Well, my old friend preempts the point I was about to make, which was to come around to talk to the amendments. And she's absolutely right to say that there is no mandate for no deal. All of those who campaigned so vigorously for it, for leaving the European Union in 2016, made it absolutely clear that they were doing so with the intention of securing a deal, a better deal, a deal that would be available in months. And the voters who cast their ballots back in 2016 were given the clear impression that that would involve I think described as a relationship, I think described by the current Deputy Prime Minister, if that's still the description that goes with the Cabinet Office post, was described by him as something which would be broadly similar to what we have at the moment. So there is no mandate for no deal. Clearly, people voted to leave, but by a painfully... I will give way.
Like me, he stood on a manifesto which promised to respect the referendum and to implement the outcome of that referendum. Yet it's absolutely clear that what the Labour front bench have done during this entire process is frustrate the entire exercise, create as much chaos as possible, and prevent any prospect of a deal being implemented. And if he wants people to believe that he's actually in favour of a deal, can he update the House on what work the Labour front bench is actually doing to put forward any constructive proposals to uphold the mandate he was given at the last election, which was to find a way of leaving the EU?
I'm happy to do that. We stood at the last election on a commitment to respect the results of the referendum, but to rip up the negotiating mandate which we thought that the Tory government had, which we felt failed the British people. I said from this dispatch box winding up in I think it was the 5th of December, when the Prime Minister had opened the original debate on the withdrawal deal, that if only she had seized the opportunity to come straight with the British people
that they had voted to leave, but by a painfully close margin, that it was a mandate that we would no longer be members of the European Union, but that we could retain a close relationship, customs union, working aligned with the single market, part of the agencies and partnerships we built together, then we could have secured a deal. And we entered into the cross-party talks in that spirit. Now, I'm conscious of time and giving the Minister time and the Deputy Speaker's BDI, so I won't. I've taken a number of interventions. I'll finish the point. And it relates to the last one. The point about the cross-party talks was that we entered into them with good spirit, with clear proposals. The Prime Minister refused to budge on her red lines, and those talks broke down. So the difficulty with the amendment that's been moved by my honourable friend, the member for Aberavon, is not in his intention, which I listened to his speech very carefully, and I listened to him on the radio this morning very carefully. Not with his intention, but with some of the practicalities of it, because he's proposing an amendment for something which doesn't really exist, a withdrawal agreement plus points to which the government didn't agree. Now, I recognise as well that there are others. Briefly on that point.
I accept that we don't have an officially published withdrawal agreement bill, but we do have very clear commitments from the government based on the cross-party talks, which would be very easily encapsulated within a bill which was ready to put forward to Parliament. I know because the former Chief Whip showed it to me.
I think he's talking about the Theresa May government, which is a very different proposition from the one that we are facing at the moment. But we weren't at that stage of agreement. If there had been the basis for an agreement, we would have seized that opportunity in the talks. So, although I have sympathy with what he's saying, and those proposals could be part of the discussions that we need to have in the extended period that we will secure when this bill is passed, as will the proposals that other members have made across the House. We need the space to have those discussions, and we can only achieve that space by voting for the bill today. This bill is successfully brought members across the House together around a single, clearly focused objective. We're united behind the need to avoid a no-deal Brexit. We need to keep our focus when we vote very narrowly on that, and ensure that we achieve that objective, because we know, a clear majority knows, a growing majority within this House knows, that if we allow us to stumble into a no-deal Brexit, it will be a disaster for the country.
Secretary of State Stephen Barclay.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The principle of this bill, in terms of seeking an extension, is wrong. And the government opposed it at second reading, we'll oppose it at third reading, and indeed it is so flawed that we have not bothered to table amendments to it because we oppose it in all forms. This bill cannot be improved because it goes against the democratic wish of the British people, of the vote of 17.4 million of our citizens, and it goes against the strong desire of many up and down this land who want certainty, who want clarity, who want Brexit done, so we can get on to the wider domestic agenda, as set out by the Chancellor in the spending review earlier today. 20,000 more police officers, with recruitment starting in Yorkshire tomorrow, a record increase of £6,000 on starting salaries for teachers, levelling up opportunity for those who warrant it, and supporting the economy through the tough decisions we took in 2010, which allows the record investment in our NHS with 20 new hospital upgrades. The member for Aberavon spoke with sincerity, and I do not question the spirit in which he brings New Clause 1 to the House this evening. But he also spoke of compromise. And as the member for Brigg Gould, I think, very correctly identified, it is the reality that the member for Aberavon voted against the deal all three times. All three times. And now he says he doesn't vote for the deal as in the amendment. But as he also said in his remarks, the withdrawal agreement is unchanged. Well, at the third meaningful vote, the vote wasn't on the political declaration. It wasn't on the political declaration that his amendment, New Clause 1, speaks to. His vote against the third meaningful vote was against the withdrawal agreement alone. That was the term of the extension that was granted to the 12th of April and then the 31st of May that would not have necessitated the European parliamentary elections. So I respect the spirit in which he brings that New Clause 1 to the House. But he seeks compromise on a withdrawal agreement text that he himself, in a minute, I just take that amendment and then of course I come to the member for Don Valley, of course.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. He would have a greater knowledge of many in this House of this. So can you confirm that the cross-party talks weren't actually able to agree a compromise? And furthermore, actually the government did go out of its way to make the assurances on workers' rights, on environmental standards and domestic legislation that the Labour Party demanded and then subsequently rode back from when it actually came to actually passing a vote, agreeing a deal and moving this country and this House forward.
Well, I'll come to the member for Von Valley in a moment, but if I just address that intervention by my honourable friend. So it is the case, I think the talks with the official opposition on both sides were done in good faith. And I think there were areas of genuine misunderstanding, such as the appetite of the government through the political declaration to participate, for example, in EU agencies, where perhaps at the start of the talks there was some genuine misunderstanding. But as I set out at the start of those talks, if the purpose of those talks was to seek a second referendum, then one only needed to look to the Carl Wilson amendment to see that the talks were not necessary. And if you then look at the way the talks collapsed, it was on the basis that my shadow opposite minister, someone of great integrity, I respect his position, but his position is one of seeking a second referendum. Now, if that was genuinely the crux of his concern, then surely that was self-evident at the start of those talks. I did not need the necessity of those talks to progress in order to tease that point out. Of course, I give way to the member for Don Valley.
Right, honourable gentleman, for giving way. And of course, I have voted for a deal a number of times. And I say with the greatest respect, we have to move on by who did what when, and we have to look forward. Many of my colleagues regret not voting for a deal, and they are dealing with that right now. What we're trying to do from the backbenches, and maybe both front benches could listen to this, is actually what we want to identify and agree is that there is much in the withdrawal agreement bill where there is consensus across the House. It isn't the only deal, and our amendment asks us to reflect on it and build on it. But for goodness sake, we have to move on. And there is an increasingly loud voice in this House, across the House, wanting a consensus to move forward.
So firstly, may I agree with the Right Honourable Lady, both in substance and in form. I think she's right in terms of the requirement for us to move forward and not to look back. In fact, I made a very similar point to the Irish government in terms of how we move forward constructively rather than look back at some of the talks to date. And she's right also in terms of the fact that there is much in the withdrawal agreement on which we can move forward. And indeed that is reflected if one looks at that is reflected. I'm trying to address the right honourable lady's point. There is much in the President Tusk's letter where the Prime Minister has narrowed down the issues in terms of the withdrawal. There's many of my colleagues who are concerned about lots of different aspects of the withdrawal, whether it's on the money, whether it's on the ECJ, whether it's on the geographical indicators, and the Prime Minister has narrowed those issues down. But it is the case, as indeed the member for Brooke and Gould reflected, that some of us have sought compromise and will continue to do so. Of course, I give way to the former leader of the party.
This is not really about the member for Aberavon and the others who genuinely, I think, do want to do something. Truth is, it's about the front bench of the Labour Party who are on a wrecking process, and this is all about how to wreck the process of Brexit, have a second referendum, hopefully when everyone's so tired out they'll vote against it, and then overturn the referendum. So that if they have a genuine view, they should vote with us tonight to wreck this bill.
My right honourable friend is absolutely correct. The Prime Minister has been crystal clear in setting an objective on the 31st of October. And in being clear, and in turbocharging through my right honourable friend, the Chancellor for Duchy of Lancaster, our preparation for a no-deal outcome we do not seek. We have seen movement, as I touched on in my remarks at second reading, between a starting point where not a word of the withdrawal agreement can be changed to one in which creative and flexible solutions can be explored. And indeed, the Prime Minister's Europe advisor is in Brussels today, making progress on that, and yet his work is dismissed by some, because of media reports, as not being of the substance that I know it to be. Of course, I can wait till the member for work.
Great. Secretary of State. And would he confirm that the possibility of us leaving without signing the withdrawal agreement is our main pressure point on the European Union, and that without that, there's no reason why they should give ground?
My right honourable friend is correct that the European Union, like the United Kingdom, want a deal. And it's worth reminding the House as to why that is the case. Because whilst their position on money, citizens' rights and the Northern Ireland border has been unified, the impact of a no-deal outcome is asymmetric across the EU. Issues like fishing, issues like geographical indicators that are not protected. It's worth reminding the House there's over 3,000 European geographic indicators, but just 88 UK GIs. So when we hear that the EU are fully prepared for no deal, when we hear that my counterpart Michel Barnier say that they're fully ready for no deal, there is a difference between what legislation or regulations they may want to put in place and the reality of operational readiness, which is much more varied between member states. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a bill which is about delay. It is about legislative purgatory. It is about disguising the true intent, not of all, because there are some colleagues who have voted for a deal 3 times, but of many who vote against a deal, not once, not twice, but 3 times, but then say that they're against no deal as well. This is a bill which is designed to stop Brexit and comes at a cost of £1 billion a month. £1 billion that we want to see invested in our front line in the way the Chancellor set out. This is a bill that is flawed. I urge colleagues across the House to oppose it at third reading.
The question is that Amendment 19 be made. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby. Division is now taking place. Amendment 19. If you can't hear, I'm sure you can read. The question is that Amendment 19 be made. Does many of that opinion say aye? Aye. The contrary, no? No. Tell us for the ayes, Mark Gardner and George Hollenbrave. For the noes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith. Could the Sergeant Arms investigate the no lobby? There somehow seems to be a block in someone. Okay, yeah. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 65. The noes to the left, 495.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. The ayes to the right, 65. The noes to the left, 495. The noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. We now come to Amendment 6. Stephen Kinnock to move formally.
Formally, sir.
Formally. The question is that Amendment 6 be made. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. Division, clear the lobbies. Order. The question is that Amendment 6... Order. Let's clear them. Order. The question is that Amendment 6 be made. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Division off.
The division is now off.
Fantastic. Well done, colleagues. Right, that's the end of this meeting.
We now come to the next part. The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. This should be as amended, isn't it?
As amended, yeah, clearly.
The question is that Clause 1 as amended stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. Order! I'm in the middle of the votes.
Yeah, the people in the lobbies, they don't know the vote.
But the vote's off. I've shouted. I can't do more.
Well, why don't we send people in?
Can't have one tomorrow. I'm in the middle of a vote.
When you can pause and come back to pause.
Can the sergeant just explain the divisions off?
Yeah, just give it a couple of minutes.
Can you go into the lobby and explain the divisions off? I'm sure the whips will have passed it on. The divisions off. Because there's no tellers.
Why is the division off?
There's no tellers.
Okay, do we need tellers?
You can't have no tellers in the
division off, there's no tellers. So what's the next bit of business then?
We'll just go through the rest of the business. Remember, to leave confusion, imagine for
No, I think it's been... No, I mean...
one is the third reading. The only thing about Let's continue to move through. The question is that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is that Clause 3 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is Clause 4 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is that Clause 5 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.
Order!
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and the amendment has been made.
Thank you. Order. Under the terms of the order of the House yesterday, we now move directly to the third reading of the bill. To move the third reading, I call Mr. Hilary Benn. Thank you. The question is that the bill be now read for the third time. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As members of that... The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Jeff Smith and Nick Smith. Tellers for the noes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 327. The noes to the left, 299.
Thank you. The ayes to the right, 327. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. Order. Yes. Point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The House has spoken this evening. And if the other place passes the bill, then I say to the Prime Minister that this House expects him to uphold the law and to fulfil the obligations that will be placed upon him by this bill and prevent this country from leaving the European Union on the 31st of October without a deal. May I also, Mr. Speaker, thank the clerks for their assistance, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Dorset West and others for their great help. And may I also join my Right Honourable friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, in most warmly applauding the bravery and the courage of many on that side of the House who have stood by their convictions in the national interest.
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the House has now approved the bill as amended, could I press the government to, as rapidly as possible, publish the withdrawal agreement bill, which really does require the proper and robust discussion in this place?
Well, the honourable gentleman has made his own point in his own way, and it is on the record, and we're indebted to him. Deferred divisions motion, the whip to move formally. Thank you. The question is as on the order papers. Most other people say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. We now come to the motion on the early parliamentary general election. To move the motion, I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, the House of Commons has passed a bill devised by the leader of the opposition, who I see is not in his place. But his colleagues, he's characteristically evasive, if not frit, Mr. Speaker. It's a bill that effectively ends the negotiations, a bill that demands an extension at least until next year and perhaps for many more years to come, and a bill that insists Britain acquiesce to the demands of Brussels and hands control to our partners. It's a bill designed to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our history, the 2016 referendum. And it's therefore a bill without precedent in the history of this House, seeking as it does to force the Prime Minister with a pre-drafted letter to surrender in international negotiations. And I refuse to do this, Mr. Speaker, and it's clear that there is therefore only one way forward for the country. The House has voted repeatedly to leave the EU, and yet it has also voted repeatedly to delay actually leaving. It is voted for negotiations, and today, I'm afraid, it has voted to stop, to scupper any serious negotiations. What this bill means is that Parliament, or the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, who is still not in his place, Mr. Speaker, and I really don't know where he is, he refuses to give battle, or at least to engage in argument tonight. Perhaps that's a sign of how he intends to pursue things in the weeks ahead. The Right Honourable Gentleman's bill I'm glad he's now favoured the House with his presence, Mr. Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman's bill, amongst its other functions, is to take away the right of this country to decide how long it must remain in the EU, and handed that power to the EU. And I'm afraid it is time, that is what it does, and I'm afraid it is time for this country to decide whether that is right. The country must now decide whether the leader of the opposition or I go to those negotiations in Brussels on the 17th of October to sort this out, because everybody will know that if the Right Honourable Gentleman were to go there, were to be the Prime Minister, he would beg for an extension, he would accept whatever Brussels demands, and we would then have years more dither and delay, yet more arguments over Brexit, and no resolution to the uncertainty that currently bedevils this country and our economy. And everyone knows by contrast that if I am Prime Minister, I will go to Brussels and I will try to get a deal, and believe me, I know that I can get a deal. But if they, Mr. Speaker, if they won't do a deal, I think it would be eminently sensible for them to do so, and as I say, I believe that they will, then under any circumstances, this country will leave the EU on October the 31st. Mr. Speaker, it is completely impossible for government to function if the House of Commons refuses to pass anything that the government proposes. And in my view, and the view of this government, there must now be an election on Tuesday the 15th of October, and I invite the Right Honourable Gentleman to respond, to decide which of us goes as Prime Minister to that crucial council on Thursday the 17th of October. I think it's very sad that MPs have voted like this, but if I am still Prime Minister, I do. I think it's a great dereliction of their democratic duty, Mr. Speaker. But if I'm still Prime Minister after Tuesday the 15th of October, then we will leave on the 31st of October with, I hope, a much better deal. The Leader of the Opposition now has a question to answer. He has demanded an election for 2 years while blocking Brexit. He said only 2 days ago that he would support an election. And now, Parliament having passed a bill that destroys the ability of government to negotiate, is he now going to say that the public cannot be allowed an election to decide which of us sorts out this mess? I don't want an election. The public don't want an election. The country doesn't want an election. But this House has left no other option than letting the public decide who they want as Prime Minister, and I commend this motion to the House.
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the second time I've replied to a Conservative Prime Minister seeking to dissolve Parliament to call an election because they didn't have a deliverable Brexit policy. Although I'm not condemning the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead by comparing her to a successor, she at least made detailed speeches setting out her Brexit policy, even if we fundamentally disagreed with them. This Prime Minister claims he has a strategy, but he can't tell us what it is. The bigger problem for him is that he hasn't told the EU what it is either. And at Prime Minister's question time today, as with the statement yesterday, he was unable to say whether he's even made any proposals whatsoever to the EU. And it's basically a policy that's cloaked in mystery, like the Emperor's new clothes. There really is absolutely nothing there. And the naked truth is that the reality is deeply unpalatable. A disastrous no-deal Brexit to take us into the arms of a trade deal with Donald Trump that will put America first and Britain a distant second. The Prime Minister knows there is no mandate for no deal, no majority support for it in the country, and no majority for it in this House. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the co-convener of the Vote Leave campaign, said in March this year, we didn't vote to leave without a deal. Even the leaders of the Leave campaign are absolutely clear that the referendum confirmed no mandate for no deal. No deal. No deal. No deal. No deal is opposed by every business group, every industry body, every trade union, and by this House, as today's votes and others have shown. Mr. Speaker, we wanted elections, so we look forward to turfing this government out. And
does the Leader of the Opposition want a general election? A yes or no will suffice.
Well, he obviously didn't hear what I just said. I was about to point out, before I was gently interrupted by the honourable member, that the offer of the election today is a bit like the offer of an apple to Snow White and the Wicked Queen, because what he's offering is not an apple or even an election, but the poison of a no deal. So, Mr. Speaker, I repeat what I said last night. Let this bill pass and gain royal assent, then we will back an election so we do not crash out with a no-deal exit from the European Union. And so it's the anti-democratic instincts of this government that cause us concern. Despite the expressed will of the House to support the bill debated today, the Conservative peers, their colleagues in the Lords, have tabled 92 amendments for debate. I really doubt this is motivated by a desire to improve the legislation, not a bit of it, but to filibuster it. An undemocratic cabal in Downing Street, aligned with an undemocratic and unelected House to override the democratic will of this House expressed in the bill that we have just given a third reading to. If they can't win the argument, they try to shut down debate. We had the Prime Minister deciding to prorogue Parliament in August, and today he wants to dissolve Parliament to shut down scrutiny. He cannot handle dissent. He cannot handle dissent and debate in his own party, and has extraordinarily expelled 21 of his own MPs who voted against him last night. The hypocrisy of this process is phenomenal. From a Prime Minister who twice voted against the last Prime Minister's Brexit plans. A general election isn't a plaything for a Prime Minister to avoid his obligations, to dodge scrutiny or renege on commitments. He is committed to renegotiate Brexit. But where is it? Where is the plan? Where are the proposals? If he has a Brexit plan, be it no deal or the new mystery proposal deal that we've yet to see any information of, then he should put it before the public in a public vote, a referendum or a general election, and seek a mandate for them. Let the Prime Minister go to Brussels tomorrow and ask for an extension so that he can seek a mandate for his unknown Brexit plan and put it before the people. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that this motion from the Prime Minister is about playing a disingenuous game that are unworthy of his office. I look forward to the day his government and his party and all their austerity and misery they've heaped on this country are turfed out of office, and we prevent leaving this
we prevent this country crashing out on the 31st of October with all the damage he knows, because he's already seen the documents, it will do to people's lives and job prospects in this country. It's a cynical movement from a cynical Prime Minister.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
I don't know whether the House wants a debate. I'll be very, very brief. I was going to join in if other people were going to debate, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for encouraging me, no doubt to the deep distress of everybody else waiting to have an important vote. I merely say that I found these exchanges quite predictable. They've been well rehearsed before we took place. I do think the Prime Minister, with the greatest respect, has a tremendous skill in keeping a straight face whilst he's being so disingenuous. The fact is he's now desperate to have an election in order to bring this House's proceedings to an end and to have the general election clearly before October the 31st. And he's obviously going to campaign before that on the basis that he's been thwarted in getting an amazing beneficial deal for this country, which is actually being blocked by wicked continental politicians and by politicians and the MPs in the House of Commons who have no sense of the true national interest, which is to keep him in power. It's wrong to say that the opposition to him is trying to reverse the referendum. A very large percentage of those who've been defeating him in the last 2 days are prepared to vote for Brexit. They voted for Brexit more often than he has. He caused delay in March and he caused delay in April, but we wish to do so on satisfactory and reasonable terms. We now have a bill which is the beginning of a pathway to actually give us more time for grown-up, sensible, diplomatic exchanges between countries. The idea that on the European Union they're refusing us a deal because they really think they're going to trap us in permanently is nonsense. They're desperate to get a deal, but of course they're desperate to get a deal, but not so desperate that they're going to accept terms which will cause chaos in Northern Ireland, politically and economically, and will shatter the normal rules which hold together the single market and the customs union upon which they're based. The Prime Minister has thrown down dramatic conditions which he must know make any sensible negotiations pointless unless he changes his direction. He's now Prime Minister. He's now a responsible politician with huge responsibility. I urge him one last time to stop treating all this as a game and to use the time to actually get a serious resolution of these impossible problems to look after the future goodwill of this country, keeping us in a proper, no doubt different relationship with our partners on the continent, and in particular keeping our economic and trading relationships intact, because they're essential for the future of our children and grandchildren.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate with all my heart the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe, who's, I have to say, as he has done on many occasions where I've followed with him, spoken with great sense. And I have to say to the Prime Minister, I'll give you a piece of friendly advice, Prime Minister. Sack your advisor, Dominic Cummings, and bring in the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe that might actually be able to give you some sensible advice. You know, Mr. Speaker, we're having this debate tonight quite simply because the Prime Minister's been defeated. That's the reality. And my question to the Prime Minister is, this House is supposed to be sovereign in his eyes. Accept the will of this House. Accept the bill that Parliament has passed accept your duty as Prime Minister and go to the European Council on the 17th of October and negotiate the extension that you've now been told to deliver. Mr. Speaker, yet again this government has been defeated by a majority in the House of Commons against a no-deal Brexit. The passage of the bill tonight to block no deal is a victory, not just for democracy, but yes, for common sense. And I pay tribute to the members of Parliament across these benches who've worked tirelessly to build consensus for this legislation to pass and remove the cliff edge catastrophe. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister shouldn't be talking about surrender. He should be congratulating members of Parliament that have stood up for all our national interests. And really, what a disgrace for a Prime Minister to accuse parliamentarians, decent parliamentarians, of surrender. It simply lacks dignity, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, now Parliament has once again displayed its will. The Prime Minister must show respect for democracy and agree to abide by the will of Parliament on the bill blocking no deal.
Calm down, Boris.
Look, if you wish to intervene rather than shouting at me, I will give you the courtesy that you didn't afford me. If you would like to rise.
I've been listening to the Honourable Gentleman with great care, but the one thing that he doesn't say in all of this, that the reason he has voted tonight for this bill is because he and his party are adamantly opposed to ever delivering Brexit. So will he now admit on his feet that that is his purpose and that is the purpose of this bill?
My heavens, Mr. Speaker, I think it's quite clear if anyone reads the bill what it's about. It's about removing the cliff edge of the 31st of October. And yes, we in the SNP have worked with colleagues right around this House. We've worked in a spirit of consensus. But yes, of course, I wish to stop Brexit and Scotland being dragged out. And I say this to the right honourable gentleman, that we will work collectively with everybody here. But I have a responsibility with my colleagues to stop this government dragging Scotland out of Europe against its will. And the message to the Prime Minister and the right honourable gentleman, will you respect democracy in Scotland, and will you respect that Scotland has voted to remain in the European Union? Mr. Speaker, it is the SNP's top priority to avoid no deal. We know the devastation a no-deal Brexit would bring to people in Scotland and across these islands. That's why we've been working hard for the past 2 years to avoid no deal. SNP MPs have voted consistently against no deal. We have supported the Letwin Cooper process in March to avoid a no deal, and now we're doing the same with the Benn Bill.
On that, would the honourable member give way? Thank you very much. I welcome the honourable member's confirmation tonight, that the right honourable member's confirmation tonight, that he will, along with ourselves in the Labour Party, vote against the government. But if the government continues to pursue this reckless no-deal policy, will you continue to work with us to block any attempt to take us off the cliff edge against the will of Parliament?
Yes. Well, I mean, the simple answer is yes. I commit myself to working with all others, because we have a responsibility to our constituents to stop that disaster of no deal. And indeed, I've been working with leaders of other parties to ensure that the Benn Bill passes tonight. We've come together to ensure that protecting the lives of people across the United Kingdom and their livelihoods is the absolute priority of this Parliament. And it's important, Mr. Speaker, that we keep working together. Mr. Speaker, no one voted for a no-deal Brexit. It wasn't on the ballot paper, and the Prime Minister needs to wake up to that reality. And perhaps, Prime Minister, you might actually start listening to the debate rather than chatting to the Chancellor, if you don't mind. It is important that no tricks are deployed to avert the course of the democracy over the coming days. And you can try and shout us down. You tried last night and it won't work. The unelected House of Lords should not under any circumstances seek to damage or kill the protections in legislation. And the Prime Minister should quit game-playing stunts. The SNP will not fall for them. Mr. Speaker, the Scottish National Party is ready for an election. We stand ready to bring down the Tory government and give Scotland the chance to stop Brexit and decide its own future. We signal our intent to work with all across this House to stop a no-deal Brexit. It is in all our interest to do so. But I also say to this House, we will do our duty to protect all of us from a no-deal Brexit. But at the same time, this House should respect the sovereignty of the Scottish people and our rights to be able to determine our own future.
And I'm grateful to my right honourable men getting in the way. I don't know if he noted last night, but the lack of enthusiasm from Scottish Conservatives for this early general election. It might have something to do with the fact that they're now at 20% in the polls and due to be decimated. Wouldn't it, if they vote for this tonight, be turkeys voting for Christmas? And if Ruth Davison can't stomach the Prime Minister, why should Scotland?
Well, my honourable friend is quite right, and I look forward to SNP challengers standing in these Scottish Tory seats, and we will take the fight to those constituents over the course of the coming weeks and make sure those constituents have that opportunity to return those seats to the Scottish National Party. Mr. Speaker, much of this debate has been about democracy. It is about the abuse of power by a government seeking to shut down Parliament. This House must respect the Scottish Parliament and, in particular, the mandate the Scottish Government has for a referendum on independence. It should be Scotland's right to choose its own future, not the right of this Prime Minister or any other in Westminster to tell Scotland that our votes do not matter, that we cannot determine when Scotland votes in an independence referendum. Mr. Speaker, an election is coming, and I invite Scotland to send a message to Westminster. It is Scotland's right to choose. The Times poll today shows that the SNP is set to win a majority of Westminster seats in any election. Make no mistake, Mr. Speaker, we relish an election because we want to stop Brexit for good. We want to stop the Tories, to stop this Prime Minister. And most importantly, we want to give the people a say, their choice to decide their own future. However, Mr. Speaker, we will not be party to the Prime Minister's games and allow the Prime Minister to use an election to force a no-deal Brexit through the back door. Simply put, the SNP cannot support this motion tonight because we do not trust the Prime Minister. And who could blame us? His tall tales, his contempt for democracy and his government's broken promises to the people of Scotland. We cannot trust that he will allow this bill to pass and remove the cliff edge before an election. And I urge other opposition parties, tonight we will not give the Prime Minister the opportunity to bring in a no deal through the back door. But we cannot allow a government that has lost its majority, that does not command the House, that has treated this Parliament and this country with contempt, to remain in office for one more day longer than is necessary. The Prime Minister is going to shut this Parliament down so he can spend 4 weeks running the clock down. We could instead use that time to run him out of office. Once a no deal has been blocked, MPs across this House, on the opposition benches, should come together to bring down this government, not on the Prime Minister's terms, but on the right terms. Mr. Speaker, time is of the essence over the next few days in order to remove the cliff edge and to remove this shambolic, irresponsible, incompetent Tory government from office.
Craig McKinley. Speaker, I think I've got an apology to make, and that is to Brenda from Bristol. And on a personal basis, I think I've only just got over the 2015 election. But we need to ask ourselves, what can this Parliament now achieve? Can it deliver that bold new agenda that a new Prime Minister wishes to place for this country? would this Parliament even approve a bold and ambitious Queen's speech to put onto statute in the future? Would it approve a Queen's speech to put those 20,000 new police on the streets and to strengthen our criminal justice system? The answer must be no, or it must at least be rather doubtful. There could be an issue of confidence if a Queen's speech is voted down. So this place is possibly only putting off a fateful day. Mr. Speaker, what we have seen this afternoon is more of the same of a moribund Parliament, while a public simply shakes its head at dismay at what is going on in this place. Mr. Speaker, it's bizarre, isn't it? There are those in this House who will not countenance leaving the European Union without a deal. And that is, I will give way.
Because it's very clear that the Prime Minister wants a cut-and-run general election. And surely if he loses the vote tonight that he's called, as he's lost many other votes, the Prime Minister should simply follow his convictions and resign. Yes. Go, but no, we know he wants cut and run before the disaster that's coming. He'll be lashed to the tiller and lashed to the disaster, and he should know that.
Well, I certainly hope after that intervention that he will be supporting this tonight so that the people can make their decision as well. I will give way.
Has my honourable friend ever heard so many people sitting opposite us for the last 2 years crying out for an early general election? The Prime Minister is now giving them that opportunity and they're running scared. They're running scared not just from the Prime Minister, not just from the next general election, but they're running scared from the people of this country who in 2016 said they wanted to leave the European Union. And it's the people opposite denying them that opportunity to leave the EU. Does he agree with me that if the British people get given this chance to have an early general election, that the Conservative Party will win that election?
I thank my honourable friend for that very powerful intervention. I couldn't agree with him more. Just to get back on track, there are those in that place who will not countenance leaving without a deal. And it's quite strange, isn't it? They're the same people who go to their local market every week and they will walk away from that trade if the price isn't right or the quality isn't right. Now, I would ask the Leader of the Opposition, I've got a rusty old heap of a car. It's yours for £15,000. I'm sure he'll just take it without looking at it any further. But when this House was presented with a withdrawal agreement by the previous administration, I obviously voted against it because I felt it was a lousy, rotten deal. I don't need to put those objections further tonight. But there are others, and I'm looking at them. I'm looking at those many others who voted against that deal, the now defunct withdrawal agreement, because of pure party politics. Now let me make progress. They claim they wanted a deal. And as we know, that withdrawal agreement gave the vassalage and the perpetual homage to the EU that many of them now seem to crave. What is now clear, Mr. Speaker, is that this House would not agree a deal even if it were gold-plated. This House no longer reflects the will of the people of this country, who gave that clear message to us, to this Parliament, that we would respect that vote in 2016. They want us to get on with a job. They want us to leave on October the 31st. They've waited long enough. Mr. Speaker, this Parliament serves no further purpose. It is time for a general election. It's time for that people's vote that many are asking for. It's time to actually stop those critics who say that our Prime Minister isn't properly elected. You can put that right by voting tonight for a general election. And I support that wholeheartedly.
Joe Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say thank you to the MPs in different parts of the House particularly the honourable members and right honourable members who have worked so hard on the bill that we all passed tonight. It is that cross-party working, putting the party interest to one side and putting the national interest first, that is what the country expects us to do. And in particular, colleagues on the Conservative benches have stuck to their principles and done what they think is right and should be commended for that. And I have to say, I think the way that they have been treated has been shameful. I'm intrigued that as a result of the House of Commons saying very clearly that we will not countenance crashing out of the EU with no deal, the Prime Minister's response is that this somehow messes up his plan. No, it doesn't. It's as if it's news to him that the House of Commons does not want a no-deal exit. Was he not paying attention on the previous occasions that we voted to say there should not be a no-deal exit? Is he seriously saying that the extent of his plan was to try to bully the EU and that he could only get a good deal by threatening that we would leave without a deal? Because if that is the extent of his plan, it is not very well thought through. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Could she confirm, if there was a general election, that Liberal Democrats will be putting in their manifesto a pledge to revoke Article 50?
It's of no surprise to the Honourable Lady that the Liberal Democrats want to stop Brexit. We have been crystal clear on stopping Brexit, and for all there are different views on different sides of the House about that, I don't think anyone can accuse us of not being straightforward about where we stand. In terms of the negotiation, the Prime Minister says, I've already given way. The terms of the negotiation, the Prime Minister says that he now can't do this negotiation because we are taking no deal off the table. But we know there are not serious negotiations anyway. The word disingenuous was used by the Father of the House, and I think it is accurate. The Prime Minister has wanted the job that he has for so long, it has been almost painful to watch. He has been prepared to say anything and do anything to get that job. And he said, I've given way, he has said, we will get a great deal. Well, now he has the job. That is the job. Go and get a great deal. But he knows that he was just saying whatever came into his head to get the job. He knows he cannot get the great deal because there is no such thing as a great Brexit deal, and he is scared of being found out. I've already given way to somebody on his benches. I'm going to say what I have to say. The way I think this is best resolved is by putting this issue to the people in a people's vote, to decide on the Brexit way forward, because I do not believe there is a majority in this country for any specific type of Brexit deal. I'm not even convinced there's a majority in the Conservative Party for any type of Brexit deal. But we could have a general election, and I say to the Prime Minister, such an election should be held in a responsible, calm and orderly way, not with the threat of crashing out with no deal either during the campaign or in the immediate aftermath. So if he wants an election, extend Article 50 for the purposes of having a general election and bring it on. And if he's not prepared to do that, don't be surprised when people are not fooled by his tactics and vote against him.
Desmond Swain.
Mr. Speaker, there is one purpose in denying this motion tonight, and that is to ensure that the British people have no say whatever over what takes place at the European Council on the 17th of October, isn't it?
Anna Soubry.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important that in this debate we are all very mindful of the language that we use. And it has been concerning that honourable and right honourable members opposite, including our Prime Minister, has chosen to use the word frit and frightened of those of us who believe that the last thing that this country needs is a general election. Given everything that has happened in the last few years, there are a number of people in this place of whom they could not be accused of being frightened. In fact, it's taken a lot of courage for some people. And if honourable members opposite aren't familiar with courage, they might want to talk to some of those honourable members who they've just booted out of their own party. Decent, long-serving, hugely loyal members of the Conservative Party who last night and again today chose to put their constituents and their country first. And the price that they have paid is to see the end of their parliamentary career. And this House is right, Mr. Speaker, to commend each and every one of them for the considerable courage that they took. Mr. Speaker, I am in no doubt whatsoever that it's not just the people of Broxtowe, but the people of this country who are thoroughly fed up to the back teeth with Brexit. I don't doubt that. And that is why I am of the very firm view that the matter of Brexit must be brought to a conclusion. There are people in this place who will know in the many cross-party conversations that we have had, and I am proud that we have worked together across parties, putting aside our normal differences, again in the country's interest. That my view was that any extension should not go beyond certainly January, maybe February of next year, because of the profound need that we must bring this matter, as I say, to a conclusion. And that is one of the reasons why I will give way one moment. That is one of the reasons why I don't believe a general election is the answer at all, because it will not solve the Brexit crisis. And of course I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Honourable Lady for giving way. The second part of the bill that she just approved actually handed power to the EU to dictate whatever extension they wanted. That is what they said.
We have read.
I'm so sorry to tell the Honourable Lady, but she's obviously been reading something completely different to the rest of us, because it most absolutely does not. This bill has been carefully drafted and properly so to make sure that it is in the interests of our country that we take no deal off the table, because that's the best thing for this country. That bill, and I'm quite happy to take an intervention rather than her just shouting at me. That bill is all about not stopping Brexit, as many of us would like to do, but it's about stopping no deal for all the reasons that have been explained. I'll quickly give way.
Will she agree with me that actually a no-deal Brexit is no way out of this Brexit conundrum? It will follow years and years of difficulties, and it is dishonest, it is not right to say that actually a no-deal Brexit will solve the Brexit issue.
The Honourable Lady is right, and not only is she right about no deal, she's also right that the former Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement also would not have ended the debate about Brexit, because it was a blindfolded Brexit that did not determine our future trading relationship with the European Union. Mr. Speaker, my views on this are well known. I believe the only way out of the crisis is to have now a people's vote. Put that deal that the former Prime Minister, well, it wasn't a deal, but at least it was something, put that to the British people with Remain on the ballot paper, and let's get this matter over. I believe the British people have also changed their minds. I think they are now seeing Brexit for what it is, and I think given the opportunity they would vote for the best deal, and that's the current deal that we have with the European Union. That's another good reason why this matter must now go back to the British people by way of a people's vote.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Rise only briefly, because I know we want to get through this, but in response to this, the reality about this tonight is this is about a general election. And what we've had is speeches from a number of people on the opposite benches, which are all about nothing to do with the general election, all about recycling the debate that we had earlier. The truth is, there is but a simple question in front of the opposition parties. Only 2 days ago, they were crying out for an election. The shadow chancellor said, "Bring it on, we're ready for it." The leader of the opposition, when he wasn't having his afternoon nap and awake enough to be able to meet the media, said he wanted to have an election. The Scottish nationalists were adamant that they were going to vote for an election. And the reality, no, wait a minute. The honourable gentleman's made a fool of himself already. He should stay put. I'm doing him a favour. What I can say, I am really doing him a favour. He may not understand it. But the reality right now, Mr. Speaker, as we are in this debate, the question therefore is, if they don't vote for an election tonight, if they refuse to vote to have that election, then they are running away from what is their democratic responsibility. I say to those like the honourable lady, one time my honourable friend, no, honestly, he really doesn't want to do himself any disfavour any longer. I say to the honourable lady that was up earlier that she talks about a people's vote. The problem with a people's vote, if she wants to put it to a referendum, as the new leader of the Liberal Party said, she would never accept the result if, wait a minute, if they said they wanted to leave, they would not accept the result. Now, wait a minute. No. Let me finish this, because it's important. So here's the fault line. Without a different parliament, a new referendum will change absolutely nothing if it votes to leave again, because we'll come back to this parliament and all that will happen is they will stop, delay and try and defeat that motion. So the decision tonight is the only decision that can be made in all reality, which is if you want to decide whether the British people were right to vote leave or wrong, put it to them in a general election and let them now make that decision. And I see the honourable gentleman opposite shaking his head simply because only days ago he and his colleague on the front bench...
Give order, Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, but the right honourable gentleman said something about me which is simply not accurate. And I asked if I could intervene. He didn't allow me, which I accept is his absolute right. But I think the record should record. I have always said this matter goes back to the British people and they vote for Mrs May's deal, sorry, the former Prime Minister's deal or some new magical unicorn deal. As far as I'm concerned, Mr Speaker, that's the end of it.
I'm going to bring this conclusion, Mr Speaker. I say to my honourable friend, if she wants a people's vote, the people's vote is in front of us tonight in this debate. It is called a general election. I have never seen a moment when an opposition party does not want to take over. This is a bizarre affair when they're running away from actually trying to defeat a government. Let's have that election. No. Let us have that election. Let us make that decision. And if the right honourable gentleman who leads the Labour Party right now genuinely believes in democracy, put up or shut up.
Yes, Phillips.
Mr Speaker, I very much wish to talk about a general election as the right honourable gentleman before me has criticised others for not doing so. I want to, I suppose, speak really, really plainly and say that tonight I will absolutely vote against a general election, just like I would vote against pretty much anything the current Prime Minister put in front of me, because they have I'm going to warn Mr Speaker that I'm not cracking on the old parliamentary, the protocols and everything, and I fear I may say some things that are unparliamentary. Please feel free to alert me to them. I have absolutely no faith in anything that the current Prime Minister says. Literally none. I wouldn't I wouldn't trust him. Am I allowed to say that? I wouldn't trust him. As well, I mean, there's literally no distance that I could trust him. No, so yes, members on the other side say so. Stand in an election. I have absolutely no fear that I would hold my seat in an election. Absolutely none whatsoever. However, the Prime Minister does not. The Prime Minister that we have at the moment is playing some bully boy game of some bully boy public school that I probably won't understand any more than I understand parliamentary procedures. And I am absolutely... Sorry, would the honourable gentleman like to make an intervention? Crack on.
Order. The honourable lady says that she doesn't understand parliamentary procedure, but on the whole she doesn't shriek from a sedentary position. The honourable gentleman has been in this House for 14 years. If he wishes to contribute, he can seek to catch my eye. He shouldn't chunter from a sedentary position in evident disregard for the procedures of the House.
Jess Phillips. Women over there, John.
So the reality is that what we have here is a game where we're not being told what the rules are. The Prime Minister could bring a deal to this House. He could tell us what his plans are for Northern Ireland. He could tell us what his plans are for trade. And I will give way in one moment. And he could... Yesterday I watched Conservative colleagues begging him to tell them what he wanted. Begging him. Yeah, churra a bit, Bab. I saw colleagues begging him to say, give us a deal to vote for. This is not... The Prime Minister has stood in front and said, I don't want an election, I don't want an election. This is some game that three men in Parliament, in number 10 Downing Street, have come up with to try and game the system so that they win. The people in my democratic responsibility is to try and do the absolute best for the people in my constituency. And at the moment, it's not all that clear. We're all a little bit confused. But I am absolutely not going to use them as a chitty in a game for the Prime Minister to achieve the ambition that he has only ever had for himself and never for this country. I am not going to use my constituents as collateral damage. I will give way.
Lady, for giving way. It's clear. And one of the things that people watching this should be aware of is that we all know in here they want a cut-and-run election. The election they don't want is the 14th or the 21st of November. That's the election that we'll take them out on.
I absolutely agree, and I will not personally, I will not vote for any election that falls before the 31st of October. I absolutely will.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I also will not be voting for a general election today because I do not want in any way for a no deal in this country, because it will not only harm my constituents, it will harm the 22,000 EU nationals who are living in my constituency. We have in this country the Home Secretary saying that the freedom of movement will end at midnight on the 31st of October, which means that my EU citizen...
I mean, I couldn't agree with my honourable lady more. There are thousands of EU migrants in my constituency, and lots of them have absolutely no idea what the situation is going to be for them. I have to represent those people as much as I represent the people who would be allowed to vote in a general election or allowed to vote in a referendum. Go on.
Grateful for the honourable lady giving way. Isn't the truth that both her and many of her colleagues don't want a general election because they're as scared as we are of the leader of the opposition becoming Prime Minister?
I'm more than happy. Let's make no bones about the fact that I am not able to be completely critical when I think things are wrong, both in my party and in your the governing party. It's just a shame that quite a lot of the people who are sat in front of me, who know what has happened over the last 2 days is wrong, are too cowardly to actually say to me in here, in public, what they're all saying in the tea rooms. You know what has happened over here. It's as if we were kicking out Harriet Harman. That is what it feels like. It is an abomination the way your party has behaved.
Absolutely.
It is and you've all crowed and given sympathy to me about the problems that we have in the Labour Party, and you've just sat by silently while your colleagues have been marched out.
You're giving way. Very well. Yes, indeed.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. And the point she makes about the fact that how the party on that side has treated its very loyal members of Parliament, whatever else might have said, I think it's unheard of in parliamentary history that an MP who's voted against his party to have the whip suspended. That is a bullying boy tactic.
I'm going to round up my comments. I agree entirely. I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, although there's plenty of Brendas in Birmingham. And I'm going to speak for Brenda in Bristol, and the reason that I don't think that we should have a general election and the reason I won't vote for it is because I think, actually, we shouldn't go on conference recess. We shouldn't be proroguing Parliament. We are currently in a national crisis. This is not a game. This is not some toy that we can play with. The British public think that we should... I'm not going to give way anymore. I apologise. I have given way plenty of time. The British public, if you were to go out into the street and ask them, they think that we should be in here doing our jobs. They think that we're away from here too often anyway. I am appalled by the prorogation, and from now on, let's call it shutting down of Parliament, because I literally hate the word prorogation, and the people outside probably don't understand what we're talking about half the time. The shutting down of Parliament has essentially killed a bill that I have worked on for 2.5 years, something that people in this House have deeply held feelings on, and I'm meant to believe that the Prime Minister is really doing this because he has a vision for the people in this country. He has a vision that comes to him every night, and it is his own face. I will vote against an election until the end of October, until this is sorted, because the British public want me here working for them, and that is what I will do.
Nigel Evans.
Speaker, well, no doubt her constituents do want her working here and representing her. And she talked about this being a national crisis, and it is a national crisis, but it's a crisis of trust. It's a crisis of trust in politicians. It's a crisis of trust in democracy as well, because it was this House that decided to give the British public the referendum in 2016, and I know the expectation was that the British public would not vote to leave the European Union, but when they listened to all the arguments, they decided that they wished to leave. Following that, we had a general election. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party both stood on a similar platform on Brexit, and that was that we were going to deliver the Brexit that people voted for. Now, I remember the ballot paper. It said, do you want to remain or leave the European Union? It was a basic binary question. And the fact is that 17.4 million people in this country decided that they wished to leave the European Union, and the margin was about 1.4 million. And the expectation, because of that pamphlet that David Cameron ensured got sent to all the households in the United Kingdom, and on the back of it, it said that we will deliver what the British people had voted for. That was in 2016. Today, we are September 2019. We should have left on March the 29th, but we didn't. Then we should have left on February the 12th, but we didn't. Then the then Prime Minister said, I cannot contemplate a date beyond June the 30th of us leaving. And we didn't. And now it's October the 31st. And we've just given a third reading to a bill that will extend that by another 3 months. Unless, of course, the European Union decide that they want it greater than 3 months, because then that is something that we will have to accept. Yes, I'll give way.
For giving away, but I mean, he can have his beliefs, but he can't have his own facts. The bill that we've passed tonight does absolutely nothing unless the Prime Minister fails to come back from the European Council with a deal. And if he comes back with a deal, we then vote on it on the 19th. If the House votes for that deal, we leave the European Union with that deal. If that deal doesn't pass this House, then this House has to vote on no deal. And if the House doesn't agree with no deal, that is when we go for the extension. Those are the facts about what we've done. It does nothing to the negotiations of the Prime Minister. That is a complete fallacy. And what is happening here is that this government is being run by Nigel Farage, and that is what's going on here.
The fact is, what this House did today, quite clearly, was to weaken the negotiating position of the Prime Minister. And we all know that Michel Barnier and the European Union listen very carefully to this Parliament, and in fact, they have a direct line, some MPs in this Parliament, to Michel Barnier and Juncker and Tusk. They're in fairly well daily contact with them sometimes. There's one over there. And we know what they're saying. They're saying, don't give in to the British Prime Minister because we can resist Brexit. And that's what's going to happen. We know that the British Prime Minister is already in discussions with people like Angela Merkel and various others within the European Union to ensure that the problems that existed in the old deal are removed. But by the bill that was passed tonight, it gives the European Union no incentive whatsoever to come to the negotiating table and to have a proper negotiation. And I've just come to the mind, and I know the Liberal Democrats are at least the honest party, as well as the Scottish Nationalists now, of saying that they do not wish to leave the European Union. And in fact, when we've had that referendum and the people have voted to leave, I just wonder which part of Liberal Democrat is actually Democrat. Because they clearly are not interested in what the British people voted for in 2016. They asked for a second vote, but what we're offering tonight is a general election, and that can be a second vote, because the people will look at the policies of the Labour Party under its current leader and look at the policies of my party under its current leader, and they will decide who of the two Prime Ministers, or the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, will go to Brussels and then have that negotiation on October the 17th. But part of the problem, Mr. Speaker, and we all know it, is that during the 2016 referendum, 3/4 of this chamber voted to remain in the European Union. They do not want to leave the European Union, and they will do anything that they possibly can to frustrate us from leaving the European Union. Yes, of course I will.
I think it'd be more accurate and kinder to have had a full stop and a pause after saying who voted which way in the referendum, before going on to suggest that those who voted one way have been voting the same way during the debate on the leaving the European Union. I voted 3 times to leave the European Union. I wish the same thing could be said about some of the zealots on my side.
Well, the fact is that we now have a Prime Minister who believes in the mission, who wants to negotiate honestly with the European Union and be able to deliver the Brexit that people really voted for, which is to leave the customs union, leave the single market, not pay in vast sums of money to the European Union as we currently do, to control our own immigration and not to be just decidable by the European courts, and certainly not to have a backstop that keeps us in the European Union without our permission of ever having to leave. What I would say, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is, as I said, 3/4 of this Parliament voted to remain in the European Union, and the vast majority of those still do not wish us to leave. And the fact is this: the British people have voted to leave the European Union. And if this Parliament decides that we are not going to leave the European Union, then the British people ought to have the opportunity to change its Parliament. And they can do that tonight.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This attempt to dissolve Parliament is a desperate and utterly cynical move. And I am delighted that tonight it's been made very, very clear by all of the opposition parties that we are not falling for it. The Prime Minister can own his own horrendous mess, because he is trying to smuggle out this no-deal Brexit during an election campaign. And that's what makes it so vital that no election happens before there is an extension of Article 50, before it's agreed, and crucially before it's implemented as well. Now, I notice that the Prime Minister has himself scuttled off. He can't even be bothered to listen to the debate on his own motion on something as important as a general election. But let me say that there are numerous reasons why many of us want to get rid of this cruel and callous government. And believe me, I am one of those who absolutely wants to do that, not least because this is a government, for example, which is not only not doing anywhere near enough to tackle the climate crisis, they are actively exacerbating it with fracking, with fossil fuel subsidies and so on. This is also a government that has the arrogance to claim that the so-called bumps in the road, that the no-deal Brexit is going to be just bumps in the road. How dare they? They might be bumps in the road to a front bench who has the luxury to be insulated from the impacts of that disastrous no-deal Brexit. But for most of our constituents, a no-deal Brexit spells real disaster, and it is not bumps in the road. And the mere fact that they could use that phrase suggests just how out of touch they are with their own constituents. But a general election on the Prime Minister's terms right now is a trap. It will not resolve the Brexit crisis. Elections are very rarely fought on one issue alone, and first past the post is notoriously bad at reflecting the true views of the public in the seats that are then won. If we are to break the Brexit deadlock in Parliament, then the people must lead the way. Now, the Prime Minister regularly asserts his commitment to the will of the people, so why is he not prepared to listen to what the people want now, specifically on Brexit, go back to them in a second referendum, in a people's vote? That is how we resolve Brexit, not by proroguing and dissolving and dodging and obfuscating. Now, I want to make one more important point, which is about how the people of our country have been let down by successive governments. The status quo is intolerable for huge numbers of people in our country. Brexit laid bare the extent to which our governance structures are derelict. The social contract is broken, the power game is rigged. The 17.4 million people who gave the establishment such a well-deserved kicking in 2016 were right and reasonable to be furious, because we need a powerful commitment now, not even to try to go back to the way things were before 2016. But that means tackling democratic failure as well as economic failure. It means redistributing power as well as wealth. So if the government were genuine about being on the side of the people, they'd be honest enough to own the complete chaos that they've managed to create. They would put country before party and back a citizens' convention to revitalise our democracy, and explore proposals like a codified written constitution, a fairer voting system so that people's views are properly heard. Let's at last have a democracy that puts people at the heart of it. And they would also finally provide a categorical assurance that they will respect this House and the democracy that we do have, and not seek to avoid it in any way, and not try to avoid implementing the bill that we have just voted on tonight.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think every honourable and right honourable member in this House respects the passion and bravery of the Honourable Lady for Brighton Pavilion, but will she at least recognise the irony that she's calling for the revitalisation of democracy at the same time as she's voting against renewing the representative mandate of this House? And I would just invite this House to consider, I'm going to be very brief, I would just invite this House, and the irony also extends to those crying for a people's vote who are now going to vote against the people having a vote about the future of this House. The British public have watched this House of Commons decline into an almost zombie parliament, a parliament that's incapable of deciding anything, and a parliament which is still dominated by Remain thinking and Remain attitudes, even though the British people clearly voted leave in the referendum. Yesterday, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I spoke about the problem of us having created conflicting representative and direct mandates. That the legitimacy of this House was unquestionably as a House of Representatives, but we qualified that as we introduced the concept of referendums into our constitution, and the representative mandate is unalterably qualified by the fact that we've had a referendum and we said we would implement the result of that referendum, and this House has failed to do so. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, how is this going to be resolved? It's not going to be resolved by continuing to put off decisions. And yet the bill, which so many of the Remain supporting members of this House are so pleased with, does no more than invite the European Union to put off the decisions. What is going to be gained by putting off the decisions again? And what is going to be, and what kind of respect will this House gain by putting off the decisions at the same time as avoiding the accountability that a general election would give to our electors to make us accountable for what we are responsible for? I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Does my honourable friend share my puzzlement that opposition benches are looking at a government that has lost its majority, that cannot get its business through, that is offering the chance of a general election, which will be about more than just Brexit? There are other things that matter to my constituents, and that they will still want to renew a mandate and give a government a mandate to deliver on those things. And that with a government without the ability to deliver needs to have a general election. And I would have thought anybody opposite would have said that.
I share agreement with much of what my honourable friend says. But then I return to this question: how is it going to be resolved? Because when supposing the opposition is successful and the bill goes through, and the Prime Minister is obliged to go and seek an extension and to accept an extension, and we get an extension to, say, the 31st of January or whatever date the European Union decides to offer. I'm not going to give way. What will happen after that? I mean, there is a definition of madness, which is to repeat the same thing again and again and accept a different outcome. And the longer this goes on, the more members of Parliament in this House will fear holding a general election, because out there, then the faith in the established political parties, I'm not going to give away this, the voters' faith in the establishment political parties is not being improved by what's going on, it's being further undermined. And the last thing I wanted was the whole of British politics to be realigned around the question of Brexit. But that's what's going to happen the longer we carry on putting off this decision. And I long, like so many of my voters and so many colleagues in this House, to move on to the questions beyond Brexit, but that requires us to respect the decision that has been taken. And it requires respecting the fact that there's a government in office with the responsibility to conduct the negotiations as it sees fit, or it requires those who do not have confidence in that government to put down a motion of confidence and resolve that question. And this brings me again, Mr. Speaker, back to the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which is what the resolution that we are debating this evening arises from the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. And this has been turned out to be a recipe for this paralysis. This paralysis would never have arisen but for the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act. I beg your pardon, I hear the honourable gentleman from the northeast of England, I forget his constituents, North Durham, saying, well, you voted for it, he says, accusingly at me. I certainly did not vote for it. And I remember, and I put on record in this House, I remember walking through the No lobby with remarkably few people against the second reading of that vote, and that bill. And I said to them, don't worry, this House will rue the day that it passed this piece of legislation. And we should now be rueing the day. Because that piece of legislation has put this House in the position where it can endlessly wound a government but can avoid killing it. And we now have, if the Leader of the Opposition has so much contempt for the way this government is conducting its affairs, and this government no longer has a majority, why don't they put down a motion of confidence? It's because there is fear in this House about facing the consequences of a general election because of the way this House has conducted the whole Brexit affair for the last 3 years.
Yep, that's right.
And when I ask how is this going to be resolved, I can tell you this. Putting it off again and again isn't going to make the political outcome of the eventual general election any easier for a great many colleagues in this House. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in his inimitable style, is showing leadership and courage at last. He is trying to resolve this issue. Leave and remain were the words on the ballot paper. There wasn't any reference to a deal or no deal. And there was no reference to a deal or no deal, but the Prime Minister of the day made it quite clear that we would leave the European Union, and this House has conspired again and again to delay that happening. People in their constituencies, people particularly in Remain voting constituencies, should ask themselves what mandate do they have for putting off this decision again and again. And it's democracy in our country that is paying the price, and it's the rise of far more extremist parties that will be the result if this House carries on putting off the decision.
Thelma Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm relatively new to this place, but when I was elected as Member of Parliament for Colne Valley, one of the few things I had to get used to was being addressed as Honourable Lady, and when addressing male colleagues as Honourable Gentleman. It seemed strange and really arcane. Yet recently I've been considering what it means to be honourable and realise that it's indeed appropriate to consider what makes a person truly honourable. And it's a pity the Prime Minister is not in his place. Would the Prime Minister be able to confirm that the people of this country consider the government's recent behaviour to be honourable? It's clear many people outside Westminster think not. Furthermore, I've been reflecting on my years as a teacher and head teacher, and considering how hard I worked, as do all teaching professionals, to instil the right values and ethos throughout a school, such as respect, honesty and integrity. I'll make progress. Integrity, I used to explain to younger children, was doing the right thing even when someone isn't watching. Well, we're watching the Prime Minister, and I fear if there's an attempt to get away with no deal, with no mandate, and trying to gag Parliament whilst we're watching, what other horrors are going on behind closed doors? Could the Prime Minister tell me if he believes his Cabinet has the integrity required to run our country, especially when some are lying flat out along the front bench? I remember some time back being invited to a meeting with one of the government ministers to discuss a local constituency matter. He said, the chamber is just theatre and the real work goes on in meetings like this. That stayed with me, Mr. Speaker. It really did. As I know that this place is not theatre to me, and when I speak, it's from the heart. And I speak for my people in Colne Valley and those that are suffering under this government's cruel and callous austerity. Yes, I want a general election so that we have a government which acts with both honour and integrity and respects the business in this chamber. However, I want that election on the opposition's terms and when there's no possible chance of a no-deal Brexit. The history books will show that this current government acted with neither honour nor integrity and made us the laughingstock of the world. Our country deserves far better.
John Barron.
Speaker, I stand briefly to raise one simple point, and it's an inconvenient truth for many in this chamber, and that is the overwhelming majority of members here tonight voted to trigger Article 50. And what Article 50 said, very simply, is that we would leave the EU by the 29th of March with or without a deal. And yet we have now seen 2 extensions to that deadline. And to many outside this place, it is evident proof that there are too many Remain MPs in this place who will clasp onto any straw that is passing in order to delay and frustrate the EU referendum result. And that is wrong. It is very wrong indeed. Not only does it make for a lack of trust, but actually it's reinforcing a scepticism in our politics, Mr. Speaker, which is not healthy at all. And we've had straws, I will in a minute, but I'll just finish this point. We've had straws in the wind clasped such as the people need another vote. Or we need to support this ridiculous motion, which quite literally anybody who has negotiated will understand. If you signal to this other side of the table you're not prepared to walk away, it makes for a worse deal. That is a fact. But not to many members here who will clasp at any straw to try and frustrate Brexit. And I'll give you one other example, Mr. Speaker, of how Brexit is being frustrated in this place, because there is a near hysteria about no deal, despite the fact that actually the UK, we trade with the majority of the world's GDP, many countries outside the EU on no-deal WTO terms. 5 of the EU's own top 10 trading partners trade on the basis of WTO no deal. And since Project Fear in 2016 failed, what we've had since is record low unemployment, record manufacturing output, and record investment and record investment. In fact, last year we had more inward investment than France and Germany put together, all in the full knowledge that we could be leaving on no-deal WTO terms. Now, despite all that, we've had members in this place who have clasped, too many Remain MPs who've clasped at these straws in order to frustrate Brexit and disregard the EU referendum result. That must now end. People have lost their patience with this place. The time has come, actually, to put actions instead of words. And I will give way to the honourable gentleman over there who stood first.
Well, I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. My simple point was this. I voted to trigger Article 50, but the then Prime Minister called a general election where I set down red lines to my constituents about what kind of deal I would get and vote for. And the Prime Minister lost that election effectively by losing 40-odd seats. So the honourable gentleman, my mandate comes from the 2017 election.
Actually, that's not a very fair point, for the very simple reason that both the Labour manifesto in that general election and the Conservative manifesto promised to deliver Brexit. And all we've seen since is utter delay and confusion, caused largely by Remain MPs who will not honour that referendum result. So at the end of the day, at the end of... Oh, go on, I will give way, go on.
So the honourable gentleman keeps saying that
this is a Remain Parliament with Remain MPs. He keeps throwing that around, but the House of Commons Library confirmed that in excess of 575 MPs in this House have voted for Brexit and voted for leave. How does he say that they are Remain MPs when they are voting to leave the European Union?
For a very simple reason, because the House has consistently voted not to honour the triggering of Article 50. We've kept kicking it into the long grass. When he voted, and I voted, to trigger Article 50, it was a very simple, short bill. It said we will leave by the 29th of March with or without a deal. Now, you've had your chance. You've had your chance. With or without a deal. But what have too many members done in this place is continue to kick the can down the road, not once, not twice, but now 3 times, courtesy of this bill, or the bill preceding the business tonight. It is absolutely ridiculous. People are utterly fed up with it. I think a lot of Remain MPs have got to look themselves in the mirror and say, actually, all I want to do, own up to the fact that all they want to do is stop Brexit. The people out there have had enough.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am absolutely desperate to have a general election. I want to see a government which actually halts the privatisation of the National Health Service, which properly funds our public services, which stops the wealth of this country being squirreled away in tax havens in the Caribbean. I want to see a government that cares about the majority of the people in this country and not just about the very wealthy. But that is not why the Prime Minister is calling for a general election. The Prime Minister is not calling for a general election so that we can have a Labour government. The Prime Minister is calling for a general election so that when and if we were to vote for it, he would be in sole control of what happened in this country, and there would be no Parliament here to hold him to account when we leave with a no-deal Brexit. Now, in my constituency of Ipswich, more than 50% of the voters who voted in the referendum voted to leave. It wasn't very much more than 50%, but it was more than 50%. I would not vote for a straight vote to revoke Article 50 because I think that would be wrong. After there has been a referendum and people have voted, albeit by a narrow margin, to leave the European Union, I think it would be entirely wrong for this House to then simply go against those wishes. I want to see a viable deal that would not destroy the economy of this country, being agreed by this Parliament, so that when we have a second vote, when we have a people's vote or a second referendum or whatever you want to call it, which I think we have to have if we're going to bring the country back together again, I want there to be a viable choice. I do not believe that a no-deal Brexit is a viable choice. I think a no-deal Brexit is a suicide note. And if anybody on the opposite benches thinks that as passengers in a speeding car, speeding towards a cliff edge, we are going to take the option of jumping out just before you reach the cliff edge, then you've got another thing coming. Yes, we will have a general election. You will not survive for very much longer because you do not have an overall majority. But we are not going to have that general election while there is the danger of a no-deal Brexit.
Bob Seeley.
Very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I find this a surreal debate in a zombie parliament. I've tried pinching myself to make sure that I'm awake. I was talking to the Honourable Member for Harlow and I said this isn't a dream, and he assured me it isn't. And I have one of my colleagues saying now, Bob, please make it go away. All I can say is for people who are organising a coup, people who organise a coup generally don't put that coup to the people in the form of a vote. We want a people's vote. It's called a general election. The government is trying to get its agenda through. Because of the nature of this Parliament, it is not succeeding. Therefore, we need an election to ask the people what they are for, rather than simply their representatives to endlessly vote what they are against. I want an election because I want a government that delivers Brexit and then frankly gets on and governs. The Scottish Islands have the Scottish Islands Needs Allowance. I want something similar for my Isle of Wight. I was talking about it to the Prime Minister in the tea room today. He's keen to give it to us. I want it to cover the NHS, an extra 10 million in revenue. I want it to cover local government. I want it to cover DEFRA and housing. We can't get that because for 6 months we haven't had a domestic agenda because we have become monomaniacally obsessed by Brexit. I don't know what the parties opposite want, Mr. Speaker. 3 times they have been offered a Brexit deal. 3 times they have refused. Tonight they are being offered a general election, and tonight they are refusing. They cling to a zombie parliament for fear of what will happen when they go to the people. We need a new parliament, Mr. Speaker, because we need a government with a mandate and a parliament that votes for something positive. From now on, a collection of opposition MPs should be known, frankly, Mr. Speaker, as a shambles, because we offer leadership. What they offer, God knows. Thank you.
Yeah. Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr.
I beg your pardon. Lloyd Russell Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the Prime Minister has put to us is clearly a poison chalice. He is like the schoolroom clown who thinks that he can offer something to us, dancing around, blabbling from the dispatch box, but we know who he is. He is a man who has been twice sacked for lying. He clearly is a person that we cannot trust, and we therefore...
Order. The honourable gentleman is referring to parts of a member's career. I don't think he's making any allegation on us, and said he hope he isn't about... if you'll let me finish. I hope he isn't making any allegation about the conduct of a member in this chamber, and he isn't, and therefore he is not out of order. But he's not out of order. I know the rules and I know how to interpret them. I don't require any guidance from anybody on that matter. I'm very clear about that. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is there is much to be said for moderation in the use of parliamentary language, and as somebody who likes the honourable gentleman, I would urge him to be a little more courteous. Lloyd Russell Moyle.
I will correct myself and say he was allegedly sacked for lying twice, and the public...
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. As many as have that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Tom Brake and Jonathan Edwards.
Pause.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 56.
The ayes to the right, 298. The noes to the left, 56. So the ayes have it, but the House will be aware that the motion has not obtained the majority required under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011. Unlock. Yes, oh, very good. Well done. Yes, yes, indeed. Point of order, the Prime Minister. We're grateful.
Thank you very much for your kindness. I note that the Leader of the Opposition is once again not in his place in what I think is a slightly symbolic way. Mr. Speaker, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of "Stop the coup, let the people vote." Now he's saying, "Stop the election and stop the people from voting." I think there's only one solution. I think he has become the first, to my knowledge, the first leader of the opposition in the democratic history of our country to refuse the invitation to an election, Mr. Speaker. I can only speculate as to the reasons behind his hesitation, Mr. Speaker. The obvious conclusion is, I'm afraid, that he does not think he will win. And I urge his colleagues to reflect on what I think is the unsustainability of this position overnight and in the course of the next few days.
Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the... very well. Point of order, Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Speaker, is there some way of tabling a motion that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's opposition?
Well, I'm dealing with one point at a time. One has to proceed in an orderly manner in these matters. I say to the Prime Minister, I'm dealing with one point of order, and when I've dealt with it, I shall happily attend to another. It is evident from the smile on the face of the honourable gentleman that he is very pleased with the point that he has made. Point of order, Mr. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I was just going to elaborate by saying this is the first time in history that the opposition has voted to show confidence in Her Majesty's government.
Thank you. Thank you. Order. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Animal Welfare Sentencing Bill, not amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. Motion number 5 on selection. Whip to move. Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, most other appears say aye. For the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Petition. Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present this petition on behalf of the community of Hollingwood Primary.
I think if members do not wish to listen to the Honourable Lady presenting her petition, it would be seemly to leave quickly and quietly in order that the Honourable Lady can present her petition heard and unimpeded. Petition, Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present this petition on behalf of the community of Hollingwood Primary School and the 343 parents, carers, staff and pupils who have signed it. They are seriously concerned about the impact that funding cuts are having on their school. I would like to state for the record what an excellent school Hollingwood is. I know from visiting the school that the head teacher and his staff are continuing to provide a quality education for all their pupils, but they are doing so, like many schools, in increasingly difficult circumstances. As the petition states, the school has seen a decline in funding per pupil of £297 and an overall reduction of £249,153 since 2015. This is having an impact on the ability of the school to provide a well-rounded education for all pupils. Several parents have written to me to say how much they value the extra support the school offers and their fear that this may not continue given the funding reductions. Many are concerned about the school's Busy Bees Nurture programme, which supports the well-being of vulnerable children. The school's nurture practitioner has written to me to express her concern and to tell me the value of the support that they provide. She recounted one young person returning to the school and recalling, "I have my family at home, but Busy Bees is my family at school." It is this sense of belonging and security which schemes like Nurture provide and which we cannot afford to lose. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges the Government to increase per pupil funding and reverse the cuts made to school budgets. And the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would first like to thank the many who managed to put this petition together and gather the signatures, and particularly Abdul Majid, the stalwart campaigner in Glasgow, Dr Irfan Jahangir and Dr Javed Gill of the Scottish Human Rights Forum and their team of volunteers who have put together a huge number of signatures, and I understand more are still coming to my office, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents are deeply concerned for the welfare of their friends and relatives in Kashmir at the moment. They are concerned about the curfew and about the internet and media blackout that's been going on, despite the best efforts of organisations and journalists, including the BBC World Service, to bring some light on the situation. They seek the de-escalation of the conflict, they seek time-limited talks, and they seek that the people of Kashmir should have the right to self-determination that they have long sought. The petition reads: To the House of Commons, the petition of the residents of the City of Glasgow declares that the dispute in Kashmir should be resolved peacefully. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urge the UK Government to use its international standing to encourage India to engage in comprehensive and sustained dialogue process with its neighbour Pakistan to resolve the Kashmir dispute, and urge the international community to play its role in securing a just and peaceful solution of the Kashmir dispute in accordance with the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition, dispute in Kashmir.
Petition Neil Gray.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to present a petition regards the dispute in Kashmir in similar terms to my honourable friend from Glasgow Central, and I put on record my thanks, as she did, thanks to those who collected the names for this petition from the constituents in Airdrie and Shotts. The petition of the residents of Airdrie and its surrounding areas declares that the dispute in Kashmir should be resolved peacefully. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urge the UK Government to use its international standing to encourage India to engage in a comprehensive and sustained dialogue process with its neighbour Pakistan to resolve the Kashmir dispute, and urge the international community to play its role in securing a just and peaceful resolution of the Kashmir dispute in accordance with the aspirations of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition, dispute in Kashmir.
Petition Sir Michael Fallon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I rise to present a petition on behalf of my constituent, Mrs Sonia Ash, which expresses concern about the current standards in marking GCSE English exams taken by students with dyslexia. This petition has been signed by over 10,200 people. The petitioners of the residents of Sevenoaks constituency. The petition of the residents of Sevenoaks constituency declares concern over the current standards in marking GCSE English exams taken by students with dyslexia. further declares that many children with dyslexia are exceptionally gifted at English but struggle to pass their English GCSE due to how many marks are dedicated to spelling and punctuation. Further notes that this is discrimination and can negatively affect children's futures, mental health and access to further education authorities. And further notes a local petition started by Mrs Sonia Ash on this matter that has received over 10,200 signatures. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges the Government to review the current marking system in regard to students with dyslexia, to make the system fairer and to remove marks for spelling